Welcome to the Tao of Sports podcast with Troy Kirby, covering sports business with over 300 industry leaders from across the globe. Now, here is your host, Troy Kirby.
Thank you for listening to the Tao of Sports podcast. I'm Troy Kirby, along with episode 883 of the podcast. Today's guest, Joe Bertoletti. Now, he is the assistant GM at Insignia Events. This is part of the Arizona Cardinals operation. This is what they do inside of State Farm Stadium. This allows them to convert, turnover, and really have a greater sense of how to manage a facility when you're not using it 8 to 10 times a year with an NFL team. I think that's a fantastic way to kind of show this stadium moving and jiving. And then Joe has actually been on the podcast previously. He was with Holy Cross Athletics. He was the director of development. And, you know, he and I got along really well, not just on the podcast, but I've seen him at NACDA since. Great guy. He has a lot to kind of add, especially on the sales side, on the development side, how college athletics might not be something you and I recognize, or at least some of us old-timers. And he actually left the college scene about the same time I did. I left in 2006. He left right in the start of 2007. Interesting to kind of see how that moves along from there. Great episode with 883, Joe Bertoletti on the Tao of Sports. Well, Joe, thank you very much for coming back on the podcast. It's been a while. You know, you left, I want to say you left in 17. I left in 16, college athletics. Do you even recognize it? I mean, it's weird because it sounds like old men talk, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that, you know, college has evolved so much to be a different landscape. And I think each year it takes on something different than it was 5 years before. There's just this evolution that keeps happening. And I think it's the evolution of college sports is starting to like almost keep on track with pro sports and how much it changes from season to season or over a 5-year period, even though I would say college athletics kind of stems behind the pros in terms of like what the focus is on and things like that. The new world order of college athletics is a lot more complicated, a lot more to do research on, a lot more to understand without past precedents. And I think that's a really hard thing to navigate for any program, no matter how much money you have or you don't have. It's just things are changing all the time, and things are being deemed permissible or impermissible, and the whole NIL understanding is different. And so you add that to the complexities that already existed. So it definitely doesn't look the same, and it's definitely a different amount of priorities for administrators, as well as a different amount of potholes for administrators.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, you were on the development side, but the revenue side, and it's just not viewed the same way as it would be in a pro sport or a pro venue. You know, there's less, I guess, red tape in a certain sense, but with a group that now wants to be part of that kind of league, having that red tape and bureaucracy, don't they kind of almost let that off the controls? Because that's the thing. You're coming from was it Holy Cross, right?
Yeah, the last school I was at was Holy Cross.
But I mean, like, and you know, I've been to religious institutions. They're not used to change.
Yeah, and I think humans, I talk about this when I teach at Arizona State, is that humans by nature do not like change. It's just not something that they feel good about, and yet in today's society, things change almost every second. So whether it's how we communicate with people, who we communicate with, when we communicate with them, but also like each generation has a different method of how they do things. So it's uncomfortable for everybody, and the more that we in sports can be comfortable with changes and how we communicate them, I think those are the institutions, those are the groups that get really good at what they do. At Holy Cross, I think the great part as I was leaving there was everything had kind of changed, because we did some rebranding in terms of what the look of the logos and the branding looked like. We brought on a new facility that was $100 million plus, and then you bring on new coaches, kind of a new rebirth of that program, and you had a lot of donors engaged by that change because it was a little bit the same for a while. So I think sometimes you have that one opportunity to reinvigorate a group, and you have to know how to do that. In today's world of sports in college, there has to be a group that you engage with that believes in the change, and that change is going to be good in order to evolve and compete. So I think those things are important, at least from my perspective. But I also think that where the money comes from, you got to build those relationships still for the money to come in, not only to your fundraising office for scholarships and operations and capital projects, but now you have to make sure those relationships exist and the money exists, and you're not stealing money from one area to move over to another area for like NIL and any other goals and initiatives that become a part of your program.
Everyone tries to use the excuse of COVID, but you left even pre-COVID, and you went into the new world of surprise. You went actual surprise, moving out west, but that's a whole different thing. You were dealing with the Royals and the Rangers. You're dealing with a beautiful facility out there. I mean, I got to be honest, it's in the middle of, it's the hardest part to get to, right? But I mean, it's just one of Goodyear's maybe the other one, just because it's not off the kind of the east side norm. How did you combat with that kind of changeover in your mindset? Because college is one thing. Mm-hmm. Pro venues is a whole different ballgame just in the speed.
So I think the new what we kind of talk about, and I see it maybe because I live it every day, but I think other places have started to. I see it at Arizona State. I see it at other venues across the nation. It's that how do we create a 365-day plan of how we occupy the stadium. How are we using it for all these different assets? And you do have to move much faster. There's much less bureaucracy that you have to be able to wade through because you're dealing with clients, and because there's so many venues, you need to be able to compete with other venues that might be a little bit more nimble in their ability to make decisions, provide the resources, or provide the services that you're looking for. So when you're competing for clients, the Phoenix market is saturated because we have spring training venues, and we have the professional sports venues, then we have entertainment venues, and because Phoenix is such a destination for conventions, great weather, and during this time, spring, you have everybody coming in for spring training. That's all competitive groups. So you have to be able to wade through that red tape and be able to engage your clients to get them to sign with you because they have a bunch of other options. And so I think for sports, our venues are becoming more and more expensive. And so you want to be able to utilize them and leverage them to make money as much as possible. So looking at events like a car show or youth sports specifically, because that's not only just a great thing to have in your stadiums, but to assimilate people to, but it also brings in additional revenue and support to the cities in which, sometimes are funding these facilities. So I think that part's important. And then, to your COVID point, there's one industry that hasn't, really had a decrease in popularity or decrease in spending, and that's youth and amateur sports. That continues to be a recession-proof industry that more and more money keeps getting pumped into. I mean, there's conferences just for entities looking to host their youth sports events in different facilities across the country because there just isn't enough. And so I think the more and more that pro sports venues and college sports venues can kind of take a look at that and see how that fits into their business plan, the more they'll see some fruitful relationships and money coming into their place.
I wonder if, though, your college athletics background actually ceded to the idea of you having more of a shorthand with Cactus League, because I liken it to an NCAA conference. It's got 10 stadiums, basically, a bunch of teams, right? They play a short schedule. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a month, maybe it's a month and a half, whatever. And then what are you going to do with that, because you've got some other resources, whatever. Was that an easier pick-me-up than you think if you had just gone into a regular sports season, because you wouldn't have had that kind of transition? Hey, we're transitioning out, transitioning
Absolutely.
in.
I think it's definitely less complicated when you have a pretty concentrated season. At Surprise, we had a college baseball classic where we partnered with Oregon State. And then we dovetailed that right into spring training. So for about 8 to 10 weeks, it was just those things going on, plus all of your report days for pitchers and catchers and all that goes along with spring training. But then people don't realize that we have fall league here in Arizona that plays in the stadium. So for a month, there's Arizona Fall League, which is all the next up and coming players, in which all the teams from Major League Baseball are playing here. So facilities get split up between 6 and 7 teams, and they're playing day games for the most part for 6 weeks. There's also Summer League, in which all the teams have some of their players from all over the world coming into the spring training facilities and playing all summer. So it's almost like a large-scale developmental league where you have something going on all the time. It looks and feels a lot like college football, where there's constantly a league or something going on to keep the players sharpening their skills and working out. And a lot of the teams in spring training are using their spring training facilities as just another aspect or another one of their developmental leagues or other teams where they'd have single A, double A, triple A, where they're building housing facilities and they're putting in pitching labs, and all this technology and all this data is coming from their spring training facilities just like as an affiliate. So it's become an important part of their developmental systems because there's so much going on. But then you need to you look through the calendar, and it's almost like college athletics, where how do you fit some of these other programs and opportunities to generate revenue in with the most important thing, which is developing the athletes or the student athletes that you have on your campus.
When you left Boston, or it's kind of like leaving Philly, you can walk through the airport and hear every foul word known to man, right? That's just like a nomenclature.
Yeah.
You get to the Southwest, a little bit of a culture shock. Was it something to have to adapt to the culture? We don't talk about that as much in sales as we probably should, but you have to kind of understand who you're dealing with. If I went to Boston right now, do you think I'd be able to, you have to develop that shorthand with them.
You definitely do. I was lucky enough where I went to undergrad here in Arizona. So I knew the market a little bit, I had an idea of who was here, what was going on. And building some of those relationships became a little bit easier because of where I'd been before. And I know that this market's a little bit culturally different. I think what people don't see on the outside with Arizona that's probably different than other places is we have a huge Midwestern transplant group here. So a lot of the people are coming from Illinois and Iowa and Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio, and a lot of them have relocated here or have that origin in the Midwest. So that aspect of it, because I always joke with my friends from New York that Phoenix is what Florida is to New Yorkers. So Phoenix, Chicagoans are coming here like the New Yorkers go to Florida. And so, you see that here when you look at the restaurants that have moved from the Midwest to here and that have been thriving because of just the whole transplant population. So you have that dynamic, plus you have a lot of the locals, plus we have a large community of snowbirds that are here just from December until April or May, avoiding the bad weather back where they're from. So you have to know that these things exist. And then with COVID, we added this huge population increase, mostly from California, to people moving to the valley. So there's an education that those folks go through in their first couple of years from the culture that they're coming from. So I think your point's very well taken. You need to understand the culture of each place you go and build those relationships. And, for me, I've been very lucky to get to meet and work with a lot of great people here in Arizona. And the relationships here definitely carry the success of a lot of the different programs and just resources that you might need, whether you're doing an event, a sporting event, or even just a festival or anything that you're trying to do and accomplish within your stadium.
The fact that you went there, I know that winning isn't really something as, spring training, but the fact that you had the Texas Rangers, I don't even know if the Royals were up at that time. So how do you build interest when you have maybe two teams that maybe aren't that interesting at that time? I'm not bashing.
No, absolutely. I think here Surprise is one of the best facilities in terms of it's built for baseball.
It's got those banners. It's got those pennants. It looks beautiful.
It is the essence of spring training, I used to call it, and they do a great job of making it fan friendly and fan first. And both teams are committed to that vision and that feel because they want the fans to feel like it's different than going to a regular season game. So the facility is designed that way. The practice field areas for both teams are right behind the stadium, so you can walk over the practice fields, see them practicing. It's free. No one's charging for it. So it really is what we all grew up with spring training. And to your point earlier about people not liking change, the changes that have gone on in baseball, like that's a really tough group that's always been rooted in history and tradition. So having the ability for fans to meet players, having the fans be able to interact with players in a really intimate way is still what drives people to go to Surprise for a great spring training game. With the Royals won in 2005 was their last World Series. And then there was kind of a little bit of a lull because both teams were kind of rebuilding. And then last year to have the Rangers win in that facility, that really reinvigorated people's interest. But when you don't have those worlds, you had that really big gap between 2005 and 2013 or 23 where, the teams were rebuilding. You have to generate interest in other ways. So whether you're building it through, grassroots and community, that's what's great about a city-owned facility like Surprise. Their connection to the community, they're part of the fabric of what drives that community. So getting people from the schools and from civic groups is really another great way to drive attendance. But then people don't realize that group I talked about earlier of retirees and people that are here snowbirding, this is prime time for them. So there's a lot of outreach that goes into the retirement communities and some of the 55 older communities that exist in and around Surprise that, again, make that fan base different. Like these groups really love and support those teams. It's almost become like a college team in their hometown of Surprise, which, Surprise is lucky because they get to benefit from that. Peoria has some of the benefit of that, but the communities that developed up here a long time ago are really rich with, those folks that want to get out and do something during the day, and spring training is the best way to go. So knowing that those groups exist, tapping into them and really building great group opportunities, and even, sometimes you're teaming up with their activities directors and they're busing them over from the community to the spring training stadium. So groups really thrive in that area. So I think you really have to tap into those and find out how you can get those masses of people that are around at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon to come to the games, because the weekends are packed because of the kids and the families that all live out in those communities coming out to the games. It's how do you fill the stadium Monday through Thursday?
The other thing that I would say back in your history is the fact that you did a lot of development. This sounds more like sales development than it does the phone crusher. I've got to, you know what I mean? I've got to make 100 phone calls a day, that type of thing. Do you think that if it had been in that environment rather than the environment you walked into, that you would have been as successful at it? Because it's more of that patient sell rather than that immediate sell. You were talking about, people coming out and progressing. It takes a while, doesn't it?
It does. I think there's some of that still exists. You still have we still had an outbound sales team that was calling and trying to make those sales for the groups that needed to. But I think a lot of our business was rooted in relationships, and I think it just depends on the demographic. Salt River's got a different demographic, and Scottsdale Stadium has a different demographic than Surprise, Goodyear, Peoria. So they go after different groups that have a different need, different want, different expectation. So it was very much sales development. It was really focused in building a relationship long-term, making something that you could see them coming back year after year after year after year, and not something that was like, let's just fill the house this year and see what happens from there. So, a lot of unique partnerships. We did some cool stuff with Ticket Smarter on their secondary market. We did some really interesting things with those 55-plus communities. We did a lot with the schools, the Dysart School District and Surprise. Those were really things that we saw as fruitful investments of time and effort. You might see us at a small school festival leading up to the season, just informing the fans about what games were coming up, giving out schedules, that type of thing, and not necessarily having ticket reps out there peddling tickets. It was more informational marketing messages, and then following up, creating those 7 impressions for people in the community to then follow up with and hopefully get them to convert to tickets later. we also did every city festival we had a presence at. So there's some great weekend outings and weekend festivals that happen in each city out here in Arizona, which helps bring the community together. And we made sure we were at all of those. So it's definitely about relationship building and development, less than turn and burn.
So you're at State Farm Stadium now. You're in the events business. Seems a little different, but seems a little the same, right? You're still converting. It's a longer-term person that has decided to schedule with you, and it's more of a giant event. You don't have to worry about the single person, but you have to worry about everybody. Kind of explain your thoughts on, really how that goes.
So the great part about being with Insignia Event Services is that, our job is to create legendary events that people remember and they have a great experience with. So, the services that we provide are to be really, really complimentary, to have good customer service and bring through the positives that for people when they get to the event. So, everything from parking to production to AV production and staging. And then we also have great facilities here that you can rent out and do a private event for 50 people to 20,000 people. So we have great facilities. So that lends itself to have a really good customer-centric experience, no matter which of those ways, you want to do it. Our job is to make sure that we execute a great event. We have great client relations, and we build long-term relationships with traveling tours that maybe aren't here in Arizona, that come around once a year or once every 2 years, so that they want to come back here. So that's the client part of it. And then, we do have to make sure we operate with great customer service for the people that are coming on site. So, all of our team, we call them team members, because without all of them, none of those goals and none of those things actually get to come to fruition. So they're really the front-facing group that makes this place really different and really stand out amongst others. We've been lucky here at State Farm Stadium. We hosted a Super Bowl last year. We had the Final Four this year. We're packed every weekend. There's something going on at the stadium, on the Great Lawn, which is one of the best tailgating experiences in the NFL. In our car parks, which are utilized all the time. With
you
different
even
shows.
got a mall across, down the way, and I know that may not be, whether that's you guys or not.
Yeah.
That still feeds back into the local economy argument, right?
Absolutely. And Camelback Ranch spring training is right down the street, about a mile. This is a center for sports in the West Valley, and it's a big part of the Phoenix sports scene. It feeds this local economy. I mean, there was a huge economic impact that they announced a couple months ago with the Super Bowl. We'll see, another big economic impact announcement come from the Final Four. But everyone forgets that the Cactus League itself, that's here in these areas, also brings a huge economic impact to.
It's like $1 billion, right?
They think they announced the GDP was like 600 million and change last year. I think the number was up a little bit.
Some of that might be due to COVID. I mean, you know,
absolutely, but it's been growing, and they keep doing a really good job with getting people into the city from out of Arizona. And so, the biggest export of the state of Arizona is tourism. So ideally, everything that we're doing are bringing people in. So, we have the Mecum Auto Auction here in State Farm Stadium right now. That's bringing people in from not just the Phoenix, but from all over. We also have, some other festivals that are starting to grow and bring more people in from outside of the area. State Farm Stadium, what's funny is we went right from the Super Bowl last year to be the first 2 nights of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. And, everyone's talking about the economic impact that's had. But she was here longer than just those 2 nights because they did all the practice and getting ready here in the stadium for the Eras Tour.
Which was more important, the Super Bowl or the Eras Tour? I mean, Taylor has her, but Taylor has, it's great when we can combine them like this last year, but the Swifties are their own kind of legion, right?
Absolutely. And
the Kiss Army has nothing on the Swifties.
Both events were equally as important. And I think, at the time, we didn't know what everybody knows now.
Yeah.
Having the tour launch here. And so, we had 2 nights on the Great Lawn for a tailgate, prior to the concert. And we had 10,000 people there each night just prior to the show. And you saw people from all over the world that were coming to State Farm Stadium to see that show. And I think at that point, we didn't realize the breadth of how much money that was going to contribute to the economy. But looking at it, the tourism impact that it had, I mean, hotels were full from here all the way to Phoenix. You had a shortage on rental cars, like all these things that you hope to see from any kind of sport or any kind of entertainment in a building. It did it. And then, to follow it up, to be following up a Super Bowl where that just happened. Phoenix was a destination last year between Waste Management Open, Super Bowl, Taylor Swift's tour. There were other shows that came through this stadium itself. It was one of the highest generating stadiums in the ASM network last year. So it's a special place. And so I feel lucky that our team and our teammates get to be a part of that and really help make it that really special place where these big, large mega events come to that ultimately not only do a great job of generating revenue here in the stadium, but also for our community and for the city and for the state.
So I'm in love with your office, but also the area around, because I almost think you need to take the kids that actually want to work in sports and actually see that there's not always a front office window, and you're in the bowels. No offense, but
no, we are.
But at the same time, you are not going to. This is not athletes making copies, right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is. Maybe Larry Witherspoon or somebody is making copies of their contract, but is that not a realistic expectation, or at least painting the picture that you have to actually want it beyond, just thinking you're going to hang out with somebody?
Yeah, I think one of the things that gets lost in a lot of what we do is I would not want to not be in where our offices are located. Like, we're in the thick of the event floor at State Farm Stadium. Lots going on here. It allows us to really be a part of the heartbeat of how the event looks, feels, and functions. And I give kudos to our ownership for, having that vision to say, it's important that they're here in the stadium, contributing to all the different events that are going on inside, outside, wherever they might be. But you got to be in the thick of it to really know what's going on and to understand what you're doing, whether you're a entry-level position or you're the CEO of whatever. And my role as assistant general manager, I need to know what's going on. The only way to know what's going on is kind of be in the mix. So our office location is not maybe what people expect, but I think for any students that are out there that want to get into the world of sports events and maybe take a non-traditional route, I think you got to be willing to do whatever and be a part of whatever and not worry about the aesthetics or what's around you. Because, we get to see and do some cool things. I heard every time we have a concert, I can hear the bands doing their audio checks, and you really can get an idea of what's going on, but that's just the background and the sound that you hear. And so there's a lot of days that I really enjoy it. And this is a big building. Like, it's one of those things where it might take you 10 minutes to get from one side to the other. So being in a place where you can do that quickly and efficiently on an event day is really important.
Isn't that, though, in a way, the best argument for any kind of contribution by the state for a stadium, that we can convert this for 340 nights? There is a reason for this, because the old football stadium model or the old baseball stadium model just doesn't work anymore, where you can have something empty because it's just not functional.
I think you see a lot of good stuff when you have the state or the county or whatever municipality team up with the team and do it to where they both have an investment in that stadium, because then they're both going to be involved in wanting to program the stadium as much as possible, because each one gets benefits or sees a benefit to their constituencies when the stadium's filled. And so I think they do a really good job of that here in Arizona, between as to who's the group that is the governing board from the state, and then the stadium management group and the ownership of the Cardinals. They just do a great job of, like, everybody's invested in all these great things going on and making sure that the stadium and all the spaces around the stadium are full as much as possible. And not only does it really have an impact financially on the city, the states, and all the entities, but there's also a prestige and a reputation that comes along with it for the stadium, that it's this great place to have events, which it is. And so, the more people that visit it, we always think about, like, this could be their first time. And a lot of people, it's expensive to go to these mega events, and like this is their shot the one time. So it's up to us and the facility and the state to make it really welcoming and really enjoyable. And that's something that Arizona does so well, is they understand that it's more than just the sporting event. It's every aspect that goes along with it. It's the lodging, it's the airport, it's the rental cars, it's the public transportation, it's the food, it's the local businesses. Everybody is represented. So our local organizing committee for the Super Bowl and for the Final Four, they really get that, and they emphasize it. And I think that really translates to the experience that our guests and our incoming guests from out of state feel and get to experience.
I always wonder if that's maybe the missing component. A lot of these places will always want to do Super Bowls. Hey, we've got a covered stadium, all this stuff, but when you look at it, isn't one of the things whether we can transport humans. And, people can say, look, Vegas was great because Vegas has transported more humans in a year than some airports ever do. But Phoenix knows how to transport humans. Other places know how to do it. Some places not so much. And when you don't have that functionality, doesn't it hurt into the revenue side of people actually wanting to spend in your community?
I think, every aspect of what we talk about in sports is the fan journey. When you do sports tourism, you have to think about what is your fan's real complete journey. And it starts at the airport. And so making sure that there's investments in the airport and in logistics and working with all the partners that go into that, there's a reason why Sky Harbor International Airport is America's friendliest airport. They really do a good job of thinking, not just how am I going to get people to and from, but like what's their experience going to be like in terms of signage, getting around. There's a group in purple jackets in the airport here in Phoenix that if you are looking for something or need assistance, they're there, and they're there all the time. It's not just for show. They actually really are passionate about what they do, and they're helping explain. That's just a simple little touch that goes on here in Phoenix that's different than other places. There's been significant infrastructure invested into the airport, whether it's through the SkyTrain that'll take you from the parking lots to the main terminals or over to the rental car facility. Like, that's a big deal because you're not waiting outside in lines and taking people's time, where you can add 2 more hours once I get to the airport to go somewhere else. There's been additional gates built at both terminals 3 and 4 here in Phoenix to accommodate more passengers. There's a demand. And so all those things, play into the ease of travel. I joke with my friends all the time about this, that when I go to the airport in Phoenix, if I'm waiting more than 10 to 15 minutes in line for security, something's not right. And that's not like that when we talk about other cities. And so I think the investment in the infrastructure that we've seen here in Phoenix is really due to the fact because we are moving so many people through. And like I said before, the number one export of our state is tourism. So making sure that the tourism experience in every facet of what we do is top of mind, that's really important. The Arizona Office of Tourism puts on a conference every year where they talk about this stuff. And I think each destination marketing organization, or DMO that we call them here in Arizona, which each city or each area has, they really think about tourism and they really have a focus on it. And so we're talking about all of these things all the time, and it's top of mind. And it starts with leadership. And I think that's where Arizona separates itself from a lot of other places.
Well, fantastic, Joe. Thank you very much for coming back on the podcast and everything else. And this is great and good to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Tao of Sports podcast, focusing on the world of sports business. Download our free iPhone, iPad app in the iTunes App Store, an Android app available on Amazon to listen to the entire archive. Or check out sportstao.com for more podcasts, blog posts, and videos. All episodes of the Tao of Sports podcast are copyrighted and trademarked.